Hey, Boaz here from Next Pittsburgh. I'm here at Kennywood. Kennywood is actually closed today, but they're letting us sneak around. We're here to talk about Kennywood history. And we've got Brian Butko here from the Heinz History Center. And Brian has literally written the book on Kennywood history. So we're here with the right person. Thanks for joining us.
Oh, yeah, glad to be here. And I see you have the book.
Oh my gosh, of course. And so you said this is sort of a good part to start talking about the history of Kennywood, right?
Yeah, because, right here we have the tunnel, which we think dates back to 1899 when the park had its first season. It was a trolley park, and the trolleys going from Homestead to Duquesne needed to leave off passengers. They didn't want them crossing the tracks, so they came through the tunnel. So that brings us right to this area where, right behind where this trolley is, would have been the turnpike. And lots of people are, of course, nostalgic for that. I would love to see it come back. But, Kennywood is the definition of change. So before the turnpike, that was the Laugh in the Dark ride. Before that, it was Dodge and bumper cars. Before that, it was the park's first roller coaster, the Figure Eight. And of course, now we have a modern coaster there. So there's all these layers of history. And that's what fascinated me. I grew up within walking distance of the park. We're here a lot. And my parents, my brother and sister would talk about Laugh in the Dark and other places. And as a kid, and then as I grew older, I just tried to imagine, well, where were these places? How could I know this park and not know where these things are? So that's what got me started on writing the history.
Yeah, and up ahead is the old mill, which has had so many iterations. So when you were a kid coming, what was the old mill over here?
Well, it was the old mill until it got rethemed to the Hard-Headed Herald's horrendously humorous Haunted Hideaway. And then, of course, it's also famous for being a nice, slow, dark ride for canoodling, as Rick Seebeck would like to say.
Oh, and we can't forget it was Garfield's nightmare for a few years, too.
Right. And, there's people now nostalgic for Garfield's because it was here a long time and they grew up with it. But it's pretty cool to see it rethemed back to the old mill. And that's one of the oldest rides in the whole park because it dates back to the first few years of the park. Now, it's been, of course, rebuilt a lot and reimagined. So the windmill was built on the lagoon in 1929. And they moved it here in 1940 so that they could put the rockets on top of the lagoon. But actually, even right where the always a good time sign is, there were even 5 rides here through the years. So the bouncer, I still remember in the 1970s, early 70s, but there was a Lupa plane and a Rollaplane and a Rockaplane called the Rock and Roll. So it had a lot of rides here, and a lot of people remember the rotor being here. And again, as when I was a kid, that was a big thing. And so people tend to think since it was round that the rotor was just converted to the what's now the Candy Kaleidoscope. But the rotor, of course, was its own building, where you stand and the floor drops out and you're stuck to the spinning wall. But there were, before the rotor, there were 7 rides there, including Kangaroo used to be there, the Rideo, and then it started out back 100 years ago with a root beer stand there. So really, just in this part alone, we've just spoken of dozens and dozens of changes. So for as much as we all want to see Kennywood stay the same, and we know Pittsburghers love things to stay the same and love their heritage, but Kennywood really is the definition of always trying to modernize, keep up with the times, to serve their customers the best way they can.
And so how do you figure out this history? Like, is it historical photographs? Do you have old maps and plans? Like, how do you piece it all together?
Well, it's a little bit of everything. Clippings help a lot, although in the early years, newspapers wouldn't even announce if there's a new ride. 100 years, 110 years ago, the musical acts were the big thing. So the park still has some blueprints. We have the archives at the History Center. And so it's a little bit like a puzzle, piecing it all together. And
So this structure behind us is a Johnny Rockets, but it wasn't always.
yeah, this is the oldest building in the park. So, of course, this was Kenny's Grove, a picnic grove. So it was filled with trees. And in the spring of 1899, they started cutting down the trees and putting in some attractions. And this was one of the buildings, the oldest building in the park, the only one surviving from 1899. This was the Carousel building. So there was a merry-go-round in there. Actually, there were a couple in there until when they got the third one, it was too large to fit in. So they built this new structure out of steel and put the carousel in there. And this was turned into food operations ever since. And even in recent years, it's been different things. There was a cafe in there for a while. So it's always served food since the 1920s.
And here, of course, Noah's Ark.
Noah's Ark, yeah. It dates to 1936, which everyone remembers because of the big flood in Pittsburgh, which actually did slow down the work here. And of course, the whale was here when many of us were kids, gone for many years. But they brought the whale back, which is really cool. And it actually was my request. Could they bring back one of my childhood memories, that cool sign with the apple and the worm?
The worm. So you fought for that one.
Yes, I did. And that's really cool. It looks so much like the original. So Frederick Ingersoll was known for building figure-8 coasters in the late 19th century. And so when Kennywood opened, he helped build rides. He built the figure-8 coaster here. He built the old mill. He operated the first carousel. And then he went on in 1905 to build Luna Park in Oakland. And of course, it only lasted a few years. The park, when it was building Lost Kennywood, wanted to honor both their former co-worker and their competitor. So they built this replica of the entrance to Luna Park that was at the corner of what's now Craig and Baum Boulevard.
That's crazy. And so what was in this part of the park before was Lost Kennywood?
Well, before it was Lost Kennywood, the scooter ride was here, bumper cars. That was here for decades. And then before that, another building that held different rides. It was called the Wonderland Building for a while, the Bug House, Tut's Tomb. But also one of the early roller coasters was here. And the building that was here, the coaster went right through the building. And then it circled around what is now Lost Kennywood. So again, we think of this as maybe permanently being here. It looks older, or some people remember it as parking or this old swimming pool. But before that, there was a really large baseball field, and the roller coaster went around the field.
Of the rollers went around a baseball field? Gosh, that's wild.
Yeah.
Do you have souvenirs from Kennywood from when you were a kid?
Actually, what I remember are the cards you would get in the penny arcade, where you put it in and you get like pictures of jet airplanes or who would be your match, and it would be some girl in like Victorian clothes.
Okay, so we're coming up to the Golden Nugget, and this is a significant spot.
Yeah, well, it's right next to Kittyland, which was one of the original Kittylands in the country. There were kiddie rides, of course, but no one had ever thought to put them all in one place and call it Kittyland. And then on the other side of it was the dance hall. And that was original to the park, built for the 1899 season.
So where was that exactly?
Well, where you see these umbrellas. And then on the corner was always a small refreshment stand. In the 1960s, it was expanded into what we see today, the Golden Nugget. The dance hall, early 50s, it was turned into a dark walk-through ride, the Enchanted Forest. Then it upgraded to the Enchanted Castle, even fancier. And then 1963, they brought in a dark ride, the Tornado. So much like La Cachot or Laugh in the Dark, where you're in a car and you ride through. But Kennywood wanted their own ride. So 4 years later, 1967, they built the Ghost Ship. A lot of people remember in 1975, the ghost ship caught on fire and burned down. What a lot of people remember is the park didn't shut down. The fire trucks pulled in and put their hoses in the lagoon, and they fought the ghost ship fire while the whole rest of the park kept on operating. But what's amazing, when it burned down, this stand was attached to it, and it survived the fire, even though the whole dance hall and some kiddie rides were burned up too, and some of the rides on the other side. So it was a huge fire, but somehow they saved this stand.
And we're in front of the kangaroo, which was gone for a bit and then came back the other season.
Yeah, it's great to see it all restored and painted, and it's bounced around the park too. And
Unintended.
it's really impressive that they brought back the background and made it even grander than before, that you see in those really early photos from the 1960s. Of course, with Kenny Kangaroo, it's the perfect match for the park.
Yeah, well, Brian, thanks so much for the tour. This was amazing. And if people want to hear more, they can find you on Facebook. There's a very active group.
Yeah, Kennywood Behind the Screams. That's the name of the book and the Facebook group.
Yeah, and that book will hopefully come out, fingers crossed, in 2025.
Right. There's the small book, the pocket edition. The second one on Luna Park is really the early history of Kennywood. And then, right, the third book is the big one that will have artist renderings and architectural drawings and everything you wanted to know about Kennywood.
I I love it. Gosh, thanks, Brian.
Thank you.